She was about to give birth. And the doctor was her ex-husband. Then he did something incredible. "Somebody help me." Zaira's scream tore through the corridors of Seattle General Hospital like a siren, raw and desperate. Blood. There was so much blood soaking through her hospital gown, pooling beneath her on the delivery bed as another crushing contraction ripped through her body with the force of a freight train. The baby's heart monitor flatlined. Beep. No. No, no, no. She clawed at the bed rails, her knuckles white, tendons standing out like cords. Please somebody, anybody. The storm outside Seattle was biblical, trees crashing into power lines, flooding the streets, trapping half the medical staff at home. The skeleton crew was overwhelmed, spread thin across 3 floors of emergencies. And here she was, alone in delivery room 7, watching her baby's lifeline disappear on the monitor screen. Where was everyone? Her water had broken in the hospital lobby 20 minutes ago, but instead of the controlled delivery she'd planned for 9 months, everything was spiraling into chaos. The umbilical cord was wrapped around the baby's neck. The contractions were coming too fast, too hard. Her blood pressure was spiking dangerously high. "Help me!" she screamed again, but her voice was getting weaker. The room was spinning. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision as another wave of agony crashed over her. The baby's heart monitor was still silent. Silence. Death. That's when the door exploded open. "What the hell is?" the voice cut off mid-sentence, and Zaira's world tilted on its axis. Standing in the doorway, surgical scrubs half on, hair wild from running through the hospital corridors, was a ghost. A man she'd spent 3 years trying to forget, 3 years rebuilding herself after he destroyed everything they'd built together. Dr. Kalen Thorne. Her ex-husband. The man who'd ripped her heart out and left her bleeding on their kitchen floor. For one suspended moment, time fractured. The pain stopped. The monitors went quiet. Even the storm outside seemed to pause as their eyes met across the blood-soaked delivery room. Zaira. His name for her was a whisper, a prayer, a curse all wrapped into one broken syllable. Then reality came crashing back with the force of a tsunami. "Get out!" she screamed, but another contraction hit mid-word, bending her in half. "Get out. I don't want you here." But Kalen was already moving, his training overriding everything else. He lunged toward the monitors, his face going white as he saw the flat line where their baby's heartbeat should be. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, and Zaira heard genuine terror in his voice. "How long has the baby been in distress?" "I don't know. Nobody's been here. They all left me." The words came out in a rush between gasps. "The cord, something's wrong with the cord. Listen to me." Kalen grabbed her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. His fingers were shaking. "I know you hate me. I know you never want to see me again. But right now, your baby is dying, and I'm the only one here who can save both of you." The raw honesty in his voice, the fear she saw in his dark eyes, cut through her panic like a blade. This wasn't the man who'd abandoned her. This was Dr. Kalen Thorne, who delivered over 2,000 babies, who'd never lost a mother, whose hands were steadier than a surgeon's even when his heart was breaking. "I can't lose this baby," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Kalen, I can't. This is all I have left." Something in her words made him flinch, but he didn't let go of her face. "You're not going to lose anything. Do you hear me? Not on my watch. Never on my watch." He moved to examine her, and what he saw made his jaw tighten. The cord is wrapped twice around the baby's neck. The contractions are cutting off oxygen flow. "We need to get this baby out now, or—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Emergency C-section?" Zaira gasped. "No time. We're doing this the hard way." His hands were already moving, preparing for what she realized was going to be the fight of their lives. "Zaira, I need you to listen to me very carefully. When I tell you to push, You push like your baby's life depends on it. Because it does. Thunder crashed outside, shaking the windows. The lights flickered. The backup generator hummed to life, casting everything in an eerie yellow glow. "I'm scared," she admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep in her chest. Kaylin looked up at her then, and for just a moment, she saw past the doctor to the man underneath. The man who used to hold her during nightmares. Who used to promise her that everything would be okay, even when it wasn't. "I've got you," he said simply. "I've always got you." But that was a lie, wasn't it? Because 3 years ago, when she'd needed him most, when their marriage was falling apart and she was drowning in depression and infertility treatments, he'd walked away. He'd chosen his career over her. He'd chosen everything else over her. Another contraction built, stronger than all the rest, and the baby's monitor suddenly crackled back to life. A heartbeat. Weak, irregular, but there. That's it. Kaylin's voice was electric with hope. "The baby's fighting. Now we fight too. On the next contraction, I need you to push with everything you have." "I can't." "Yes, you can. You're the strongest person I know, Zaira Castellanos. You survived losing your parents. You survived medical school. You survived me walking away." His voice cracked on the last words. "You can survive this too." The contraction hit like a tidal wave, and Zaira pushed with every ounce of strength in her body, screaming until her throat was raw. She pushed with 3 years of anger, 3 years of pain, 3 years of rebuilding herself from the ashes of their marriage. "I can see the head." Kaylin shouted over her screams. "The cord, I can reach the cord." His hands moved with surgical precision, unwrapping the umbilical cord from around the baby's neck even as Zaira pushed. It was the most dangerous moment in any delivery, the moment when everything could go catastrophically wrong. "One more push, Zaira. One more, and your baby is free." She looked at him then, this man who had once been her everything and then her nothing, and saw something in his eyes that took her breath away. Love. Pure, undiluted, never stopped loving you love. "Together," she whispered. "Together," he promised. And as the next contraction built to a crescendo that would either save them all or destroy them, Zaira realized that sometimes the most impossible moments demand the most impossible choices. Sometimes the person who broke you is the only one who can save you. The baby's heart rate was climbing. Kaylin's hands were steady. The storm outside was reaching its peak. And in Delivery Room 7 at Seattle General Hospital, 2 people who had loved each other and lost each other were about to discover if love could survive the ultimate test. The monitor beeped frantically. Zaira pushed with everything she had left. And in the space between heartbeats, everything changed. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where the person you least expected became the one you needed most? We're dying to know what you think is going to happen next. Drop your predictions in the comments. The deepest wounds come from those who once held our hearts, but sometimes healing begins in the most broken places. The baby's first cry pierced the air like salvation itself. "She's here." Kaylin's voice cracked with emotion as he lifted the tiny blood-covered miracle into the harsh hospital lighting. "Zaira, she's perfect. She's absolutely perfect." Zaira collapsed back against the pillows, her entire body shaking with exhaustion and relief. Tears streamed down her face as she watched Kaylin, this man who had once dreamed of this exact moment with her, gently clear their daughter's airways and wrap her in a warm blanket. Their daughter. The words felt foreign and familiar all at once. "Let me hold her," Zaira whispered, her arms already reaching out with an instinct as old as time itself. Kaylin placed the baby on Zaira's chest, and the moment their skin touched, the world shifted. 7 pounds, 2 ounces of pure miracle gazed up at her with dark eyes that looked exactly like her father's. The baby's tiny fingers wrapped around Zaira's thumb with surprising strength, as if she already knew she was exactly where she belonged. "Hello, beautiful," Zaira breathed, her voice thick with tears. "I'm your mama. I've been waiting so long to meet you." For a moment, the delivery room felt sacred. Outside, the storm still raged, but inside this small space, peace had descended like a blessing. The monitors showed strong vital signs. The bleeding had stopped. Mother and baby were safe. But then reality began to seep back in, cold and complicated. Kaylin was cleaning up with the methodical precision she remembered from their residency days together. His movements were efficient, professional, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands trembled slightly as he disposed of the medical supplies. He hadn't looked directly at her since placing the baby in her arms. "The pediatric team will be up in a few minutes to run some tests," he said quietly, his voice carefully neutral. "Standard procedure after a complicated delivery. Her APGAR scores are excellent, but we want to make sure there are no lingering effects from the cord compression." Zaira nodded, still mesmerized by her daughter's face. What about the father? "Someone needs to call Marcus. He's in Chicago on business, but the storm—" "I'll have the nurses try to reach him," Kaylin interrupted, and she caught the slight tightening around his eyes at the mention of Marcus's name. Marcus. Sweet, uncomplicated Marcus Rodriguez, the software engineer who'd enter her life 18 months ago like a gentle summer rain after years of drought. Marcus, who brought her coffee every morning and never raised his voice, and talked about building a future together with the quiet certainty of a man who'd never had his heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Marcus, who was supposed to be here holding her hand, coaching her through contractions, cutting the umbilical cord of his daughter. His daughter. Not Kaylin's. Never Kaylin's, no matter how much her treacherous heart whispered otherwise in moments like this. Dr. Thorne. A young nurse appeared in the doorway, her scrubs damp from the storm outside. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have 3 more women in active labor, and Dr. Patterson is still stuck on I-5. The bridge is completely flooded." Kaylin's jaw tightened. "How far along?" "One's at 8 centimeters. The other 2 are close behind. It's going to be a long night." He nodded grimly, then finally looked at Zaira. Really looked at her, for the first time since their daughter was born. The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "I need to go," he said softly. "But I'll check on you both later, okay?" "Kaylin, wait." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. "Thank you. For everything. If you hadn't been here." She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't voice the horrible possibilities that had been racing through her mind during those terrifying moments when the monitor had gone silent. "You don't need to thank me," he said, and something in his tone made her look up sharply. "I told you once that I'd always protect you. That promise didn't end with our divorce papers." The words hit her like a physical blow, dredging up memories she'd spent 3 years trying to bury. Their wedding day, when he'd promised in front of God and everyone that he would love, honor, and protect her for the rest of their lives. The night before he left, when he'd held her while she cried and sworn that walking away was the only way to save them both from destroying each other completely. Kaylin. But he was already gone, leaving behind only the lingering scent of his cologne and the weight of everything they'd never said to each other. Zaira looked down at her daughter, who had fallen asleep against her chest with a trusting abandonment that only newborns possessed. "What am I supposed to do now, little one?" she whispered. "How do I explain to you that your daddy is a good man who's going to love you so much, but the man who brought you into this world? He's the one who taught me what heartbreak really means." The baby stirred slightly, making a soft sound that might have been a sigh or a dream or just the simple contentment of being held by the person who loved her most in the world. Zaira's mind drifted back, unbidden, to another storm 3.5 years ago. She and Kaylin had been in their tiny apartment near the university hospital, studying for their final residency exams. The power had gone out, leaving them with nothing but candlelight and each other. "Tell me about our future," she'd said, curled up against his chest on their second-hand couch. "Our future." He'd laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. "Well, Dr. Castellanos, first we're going to finish our residencies. Then you're going to become the most brilliant pediatric surgeon Seattle has ever seen, and I'm going to deliver babies and save lives and probably fall asleep standing up most nights. And then, he'd said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, we're going to buy a house with a big backyard and fill it with our own babies. 3, at least. Maybe 4. 4. She'd laughed, poking him in the ribs. Who's going to carry 4 babies, Dr. Thorne? We'll figure it out. We always figure it out together. Together. How naive they'd been, thinking love would be enough to overcome everything else. Thinking their bond was strong enough to survive the crushing pressure of 2 demanding careers, the stress of infertility treatments, the slow erosion of intimacy as they passed each other like ships in the night. The final fight had been about something so stupid she could barely remember the details now. Something about him missing dinner with her parents, about her spending too much money on another round of fertility drugs, about how they never talked anymore except to argue about money and schedules and whose turn it was to do the dishes. But the real fight, the one that had ended everything, had been about children. About her desperate need to become a mother and his growing conviction that maybe they weren't ready, maybe they should wait, maybe they should focus on their careers first. You don't want children with me, she'd accused him that terrible Tuesday morning, her voice sharp with months of accumulated hurt. You want the idea of children someday, but not the reality of them now. Not with me. That's not true. But his voice had lacked conviction, and they both knew it. Then prove it. Let's do another round of IVF. Let's really try this time. Zaira, we can't keep putting ourselves through this. The hormones are making you miserable, the procedures are bankrupting us, and we're both so exhausted we can barely stand each other most days. So that's it? You're giving up on our family before we even have one. I'm not giving up. I'm trying to save what we have left. But there hadn't been anything left to save. 3 years of trying to conceive had taken their toll, turning their love into something desperate and fragile and ultimately breakable. When he'd walked out that morning, claiming he needed time to think, she'd known he wasn't coming back. The divorce papers had arrived 6 weeks later, along with a check for her half of their savings and a note that simply said, I'm sorry. You deserve better than what I can give you. Knock, knock. The voice at the door was warm and familiar, breaking Zaira out of her painful reverie. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the obstetrician who was supposed to have delivered her baby, stood in the doorway with her coat still dripping from the storm. Sarah. Zaira's face lit up with relief. I thought you were stuck at home. I was, until I heard about the emergency. Sarah approached the bed, her experienced eyes quickly taking in both mother and baby. I got here as fast as I could, but it looks like Dr. Thorne took excellent care of you both. There was something in Sarah's tone, a careful neutrality that made Zaira wonder exactly what the hospital staff knew about her history with Kalen. He saved our lives, Zaira admitted quietly. If he hadn't been here. Kalen Thorne is one of the best obstetricians I've ever worked with, Sarah said simply. Your daughter is lucky he was available. Lucky. Was that what this was? Lucky that the one man she'd spent 3 years trying to forget had been the one to guide her daughter safely into the world? Has anyone been able to reach Marcus? Zaira asked. Sarah's expression softened with sympathy. The phones are down all across the Pacific Northwest. The storm is worse than anything we've seen in 20 years. But as soon as communications are restored, we'll get word to him. Zaira nodded, trying to push down the complicated emotions swirling in her chest. Marcus should be here. Marcus, who had held her hand through every prenatal appointment, who had painted the nursery soft yellow because they'd wanted to be surprised, who had read parenting books with the same methodical dedication he brought to debugging code. But instead, it was Kalen who had witnessed the most important moment of her life. Kalen who had seen her at her most vulnerable, who had held their daughter first, who had promised to always protect her even when she'd thought that promise was long dead and buried. What's her name? Sarah asked, gently stroking the baby's downy head. Zaira looked down at her daughter, this perfect little person who had fought so hard to enter the world. She and Marcus had discussed names for months, finally settling on Emma Claire. Emma for new beginnings, Claire for the clarity they hoped she would bring to their lives. But looking at her now, with Kaylin's dark eyes and her own stubborn chin, another name whispered itself in her heart. The name she and Kaylin had chosen together during those long-ago conversations about their future family. Emma, she said finally, honoring the choice she'd made with Marcus while keeping the deeper truth locked safely in her heart. Her name is Emma. Emma, Sarah repeated, testing the name with a smile. It's beautiful. She's beautiful. As if summoned by the sound of her name, Emma opened her eyes and looked directly at her mother. In that moment, Zaira felt the final piece of her heart click into place. Everything she'd been through, the heartbreak, the loneliness, the long journey to this moment, had been worth it for this. For her. But even as she marveled at the miracle in her arms, questions swirled in her mind like the storm still raging outside. What would Marcus say when he learned that Kaylin had delivered his daughter? How would they navigate co-parenting when Zaira's ex-husband worked at the same hospital where Emma would likely need medical care? And perhaps most dangerous of all, how was she supposed to protect her heart from falling for Kaylin Thorne all over again, when he just reminded her why she'd loved him so completely in the first place? Thunder crashed outside, and Emma stirred in her arms. Zaira held her closer, whispering promises of love and protection and a future bright with possibility. But she couldn't shake the feeling that the storm outside was nothing compared to the one brewing in her heart. What do you think is more powerful, first love or the love that comes after heartbreak? Share your thoughts about second chances and whether some relationships are worth fighting for, no matter how much they've hurt us in the past. Sometimes the truth arrives like lightning, sudden, blinding, and impossible to ignore. Zaira had been drifting in and out of an exhausted sleep when the shouting started. Where is she? Where's my wife? Marcus's voice echoed through the maternity ward like a battle cry, raw with panic and 3 hours of white-knuckled terror. Zaira's eyes snapped open just as he burst through the door of her room, his dark hair plastered to his head from the rain. His usually pristine business suit wrinkled and soaked. Marcus. Relief flooded through her as he crossed the room in 2 strides, gathering her and Emma into his arms with desperate intensity. Jesus, Zaira, when I got the message, his voice cracked as he pulled back to look at her, his hands shaking as they traced her face. Are you okay? Is the baby? I tried to get here, but the highways were completely shut down, and they wouldn't let any flights take off, and I thought, God, I thought I might lose you both. We're okay, she assured him, though even as she said it, her eyes drifted toward the door where she could still hear the controlled chaos of the storm-ravaged hospital. Marcus, meet your daughter. Meet Emma. Marcus's entire face transformed as he looked down at the sleeping baby in Zaira's arms. Wonder, love, and something that looked like terror all warred across his features as he reached out with one finger to stroke Emma's tiny cheek. She's so small, he whispered. She's so perfect. I can't believe, he looked up at Zaira, his brown eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm so sorry I wasn't here. I should have been here. You're here now, Zaira said softly, but something cold was settling in her stomach as she watched Marcus with their daughter. Something that felt disturbingly like guilt. Who delivered her? The nurse said Dr. Martinez was. There was an emergency, Zaira said quickly, not wanting to see Marcus's reaction to the truth. Not yet. Not when he was looking at Emma like she was the most precious thing in the world. Another doctor stepped in. But Marcus wasn't listening. He was too busy marveling at Emma's tiny fingers, at the way she seemed to fit perfectly in the crook of his arm, at the miracle of holding his daughter for the first time. I brought the car seat, he said, his voice thick with emotion. And I stopped at Target on the way here. I know we already have everything we need, but I couldn't help myself. I bought her this little pink dress with butterflies on it, and these tiny socks that look like they're made for a doll, and... He was rambling the way he always did when he was nervous or overwhelmed, and normally Zaira found it endearing. But right now, all she could think about was Kaylin's hands delivering Emma, Kaylin's voice promising to protect them both, Kalen's eyes when he looked at their daughter for the first time. Their daughter. The thought came unbidden, unwelcome, and absolutely terrifying. "Marcus," she started, knowing she had to tell him the truth, knowing she couldn't let him live in ignorance about who had brought Emma into the world. But before she could continue, the door opened and Dr. Martinez appeared with a clipboard and a warm smile. "Mr. Rodriguez, I'm so glad you made it safely. I was worried about you driving in this weather." "Dr. Martinez." Marcus stood up, shifting Emma carefully in his arms. "Thank you for taking such good care of them. I know it couldn't have been easy with the storm and everything." Sarah's smile faltered slightly, and her eyes flicked to Zaira with a question in them. "Actually, I wasn't able to make it in time for the delivery. Dr. Thorne handled everything beautifully." The name hit the room like a bomb. Marcus went very still, his face draining of color as he processed what he'd just heard. "Dr. Thorne," he repeated slowly, and Zaira could hear the careful control in his voice. As in my ex-husband delivered our daughter," Zaira finished quietly, the words feeling like shards of glass in her throat. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Emma seemed to sense the shift in the room, stirring restlessly in Marcus's arms. "Your ex-husband," Marcus said finally, and his voice was so calm, so carefully neutral, that Zaira knew he was furious. "The ex-husband who broke your heart. The ex-husband you told me you never wanted to see again. That ex-husband delivered Emma." "Marcus. Where is he?" Marcus's voice was still controlled, but there was steel underneath it now. "Where is Dr. Thorne?" "He's with other patients," Sarah interjected quickly, clearly sensing the tension. "The storm has created multiple emergencies tonight, and I want to see him." Marcus handed Emma back to Zaira with movements that were just a little too careful, a little too precise. "I want to thank him for taking care of my family." The way he emphasized my family made Zaira's heart clench. She knew Marcus well enough to recognize the signs, the rigid posture, the overly polite tone, the way his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. He was holding onto his temper by a thread. "Marcus, please don't." "Don't what?" He turned to look at her, and she saw hurt mixing with anger in his dark eyes. "Don't thank the man who delivered my daughter? Don't wonder why my girlfriend never mentioned that her ex-husband works at the same hospital where she's been receiving prenatal care for the past 9 months. The accusation in his voice hit her like a slap. "You think I planned this?" "I don't know what to think." Marcus ran his hands through his damp hair, pacing to the window where the storm was finally beginning to weaken. "I don't know why you never told me he worked here. I don't know why you didn't demand another doctor when he showed up. I don't know." "Because Emma was dying." The words exploded out of Zaira with all the fear and desperation she'd been holding back. The cord was wrapped around her neck, her heart rate was dropping, and there was no one else here. What was I supposed to do? Let our daughter die because I was too proud to accept help from the one person who could save her? Marcus stopped pacing, his shoulders sagging as the fight went out of him. "I'm sorry. You're right, of course you're right. He looked at Emma, then back at Zaira. "I just wish I had been here. I wish I could have been the one to bring her into the world safely." "So do I," Zaira whispered, and she meant it. She wished Marcus could have been here, wished she could have avoided the complicated tangle of emotions that Kalen's presence had stirred up. But wishing couldn't change what had happened. "Mr. Rodriguez." They all turned to see Kalen standing in the doorway, still in his scrubs, his hair mussed from what had clearly been a long night of deliveries. His eyes moved from Marcus to Zaira to Emma, and something unreadable flickered across his face. "Dr. Thorne." Marcus straightened, his businessman's mask sliding back into place. "I wanted to thank you for taking care of Zaira and Emma." "You don't need to thank me," Kalen said, echoing what he'd told Zaira earlier. "I was just doing my job." But his eyes were on Emma as he spoke, and Zaira saw something there that made her breath catch. The same expression he'd worn when they'd talked about having children together, when he'd imagined holding his own daughter for the first time. "Still," Marcus continued, "I can't imagine what would have happened if you hadn't been here." "Neither can I," Kalen said quietly, and the honesty in his voice seemed to surprise even him. The three adults stood in awkward silence, the weight of history and complicated emotions filling the space between them. Emma chose that moment to wake up, her tiny face scrunching up as she began to cry. "She's probably hungry," Zaira said, grateful for the distraction. "The nurse said she should be ready too." "Actually," Kalen interrupted, and something in his tone made both Zaira and Marcus look at him sharply. "There's something we need to discuss. About Emma." Zaira's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" Kalen hesitated, his eyes moving between the three of them. The blood work came back from the lab. There were some unusual results that need to be addressed. "What kind of unusual results?" Marcus demanded, stepping closer to Zaira and Emma with protective instincts blazing. "It's probably nothing," Kalen said quickly, but Zaira could see the worry in his eyes. "But Emma's blood type is AB negative. It's rare, and given the complications during delivery, we need to run some additional tests to make sure everything is." "What's unusual about that?" Zaira interrupted, but even as she asked, she could see Marcus doing the same mental calculations she was. "AB negative requires specific genetic combinations," Kalen explained carefully. "It's not impossible, but given your blood types—" He trailed off, but the implications hung in the air like smoke from a fire. Zaira was O positive. Marcus was A positive. For Emma to be AB negative. "There has to be a mistake," Marcus said, but his voice sounded hollow. "Lab errors happen all the time, right? Samples get mixed up, results get switched." "We ran the test twice," Kalen said gently. "I wanted to be absolutely certain before bringing this to your attention." The room tilted around Zaira as the full weight of what Kalen was saying hit her. She looked down at Emma, this perfect little girl she already loved more than her own life, and felt the world rearranging itself around them. "You're saying Emma isn't Marcus's biological daughter," she whispered. "I'm saying we need to run a paternity test to be certain," Kalen corrected, but they all knew what the blood work was telling them. Marcus sank into the chair beside her bed, his face white with shock. "How is that possible?" "Zaira, we were careful about timing, we tracked your cycles, He stopped abruptly, his eyes widening as another possibility occurred to him. A possibility that made Zaira's stomach drop like a stone. "The fertility clinic," she breathed. "The IVF attempt 6 months before I met you. They said it failed, but what if?" "What if what?" Marcus's voice was sharp now, cutting. Zaira looked at Kalen, seeing her own terrible realization reflected in his eyes. What if they made a mistake? What if they used the wrong sperm sample? What if Emma is? She couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't voice the possibility that was suddenly roaring through her mind like a freight train. "They still had our genetic material on file," Kalen said quietly. "From when we were married. From when we were trying to conceive." The words hung in the air like an indictment, like a revelation, like the answer to a prayer Zaira thought she'd stopped praying years ago. Emma was biologically Kalen's daughter. The daughter they dreamed of, fought for, and ultimately lost each other over. She had been growing inside Zaira all along, conceived not through love but through medical error, carried by a woman who had no idea she was nurturing the child of the man who'd broken her heart. "This is impossible," Marcus whispered, but even as he said it, Zaira could see him looking at Emma with new eyes, searching for similarities to himself and finding none. "We'll need to contact the fertility clinic," Kalen said, his voice professionally calm even though his hands were shaking. "There will need to be an investigation, possible legal action." "Legal action?" Zaira's voice was sharp with panic. "What does this mean for Emma? What does this mean for us?" But even as she asked the questions, she knew the answers would change everything. Marcus wasn't Emma's father. The man she'd built a life with, planned a future with, wasn't connected to this child by anything but love and intention. And Kalen was Emma's biological father. The man she'd divorced, the man she'd spent 3 years trying to forget, was genetically tied to the most important person in her world. "I need some air," Marcus said abruptly, standing up so fast the chair scraped against the floor. "I need to, I can't." He headed for the door without finishing the sentence, leaving Zaira alone with Emma, with Kalen, and with the truth that was going to shatter everything she'd built since their divorce. "Marcus, wait!" she called after him, but he was already gone. In the silence that followed, Zaira found herself looking at Kalen, really looking at him, and seeing Emma's father for the first time. The man who had given her this precious gift without even knowing it, who had delivered his own daughter into the world while believing he was just saving a stranger's child. "Kalen," she whispered, her voice breaking on his name. He moved closer to the bed, his eyes fixed on Emma with an expression of wonder and terror and something that looked like destiny finally catching up with them. "She has your chin," he said softly. "And my mother's nose. What do we do now?" Zaira asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. Kalen reached out slowly, carefully, and touched Emma's tiny hand with one finger. She immediately grasped it with the instinctive grip of a newborn, and the sight of their biological father and daughter touching for the first time brought tears to Zaira's eyes. "Now," he said quietly, "we figure out how to be a family we never expected to become." Outside, the storm was finally passing, but inside Room 7 at Seattle General Hospital, a different kind of tempest was just beginning. Have you ever discovered a truth that changed everything you thought you knew about your life? What do you think Marcus should do? Fight for the family he thought was his, or step aside for biological connections? Drop your thoughts below. When the foundation of your world crumbles, you discover what you're really made of, and who will stand beside you in the rubble. 3 days later, Zaira's Seattle apartment felt like a war zone disguised as a nursery. The yellow walls that she and Marcus had painted together now seemed to mock her with their cheerful optimism. Baby clothes hung in the closet, half of them gifts from Marcus's mother, who didn't yet know that her granddaughter wasn't biologically related to her son. The crib Marcus had assembled with such careful precision stood empty, because Emma was sleeping in Zaira's arms, and she couldn't bring herself to put her down. She couldn't stop looking at her daughter's face, searching for traces of Kalen in every feature. The dark eyes were definitely his. The stubborn set of her tiny jaw. Even the way she curled her fingers reminded Zaira of how Kalen used to sleep, one hand always reaching for something just out of grasp. The paternity test results had arrived that morning, delivered by courier in a manila envelope that had sat unopened on her kitchen counter for 2 hours before she'd found the courage to tear it open. 99.99% probability that Dr. Kalen Michael Thorne is the biological father of Emma Claire Rodriguez. The clinical language couldn't capture the earthquake those words had created in her life. Marcus hadn't come home. He'd been staying at his brother's place across town, sending carefully polite texts asking about Emma's feeding schedule and whether she needed anything from the store. The texts were killing her, so formal, so distant, like they were strangers instead of two people who had planned to spend their lives together. "How is Emma sleeping? Did the pediatrician say everything looked normal? I picked up more diapers. I'll leave them by the front door. Never, how are you? Never, I miss you. Never, can we talk about this?" The knock on her door made her jump, and Emma stirred in her arms with a soft whimper of protest. "It's okay, baby girl," Zaira whispered, rocking gently as she moved toward the door. "Everything's okay." But when she looked through the peephole, her heart nearly stopped. Kalen stood in the hallway, holding a small gift bag and looking like a man walking to his own execution. He'd traded his surgical scrubs for jeans and a dark sweater, and the casual clothes made him look younger, more like the man she'd fallen in love with in medical school. Zaira took a deep breath and opened the door. "Hi," he said quietly. "Hi." They stared at each other for a moment, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. I brought something for Emma, Kaylin said finally, holding up the gift bag. I know it's probably presumptuous, but I saw it and thought. He stopped, running a hand through his hair. Can I come in? Zaira stepped aside wordlessly, watching as he took in the apartment that should have been a happy family home and instead felt like the aftermath of a natural disaster. Marcus isn't here, she said, though it was obvious from the silence, from the single coffee cup on the counter, from the way the space felt hollow and incomplete. I know. I ran into him at the hospital this morning. He was. Kaylin paused, choosing his words carefully. He was returning the baby supplies he'd bought. The ones he mentioned the night Emma was born. The words hit Zaira like a physical blow. He returned them? The pink dress with butterflies. The tiny socks. All of it. Kaylin's voice was gentle, but she could hear the anger underneath. I tried to talk to him, but he wouldn't listen. Zaira sank onto the couch, Emma still cradled in her arms. He thinks I betrayed him. He thinks I knew somehow that I planned this. Did you? The question was quiet, but it cut through the air like a scalpel. What? Zaira's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. Did I what? No. About Emma. About the possibility that she might be mine. How could you even ask me that? The hurt in her voice made Emma fuss, and Zaira immediately softened her tone, bouncing gently to soothe her daughter. You think I would have put all of us through this if I'd known? You think I would have let Marcus fall in love with a child that wasn't his? I don't know what to think. Kaylin sat down across from her, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. 3 years ago, you told me you never wanted to see me again. You said I'd destroyed any chance we had of having a family together. And now we have a daughter, Zaira finished, the words feeling strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. We have a daughter, he repeated softly, and the wonder in his voice made her heart clench. They both looked at Emma, who had fallen back asleep with the peaceful oblivion that only babies possessed. Her tiny face was relaxed, her breathing steady, completely unaware that she was the center of a storm that was tearing 3 adults' lives apart. I've been doing research, Kaylin said quietly. About the fertility clinic. About what happened. And it was human error. A lab technician confused 2 samples during the preparation process. Our embryos were supposed to be destroyed after the divorce, but there was a clerical error. They were stored instead of disposed of. Zaira closed her eyes, trying to process the implications. So when I went back for that final IVF attempt, they used our embryo instead of Marcus's. The pregnancy you thought failed, it didn't fail, Zaira. It worked. Emma is the baby we created when we were still married, still hoping, still believing we could make it work. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her. The child they dreamed of, fought over, and ultimately lost their marriage trying to conceive. She had been there all along, waiting to be born into a world where her parents were strangers to each other. I keep thinking about that fight, Zaira whispered. Our last fight. About having children, about whether we were ready. If we'd known. If we'd known, would it have changed anything? Kaylin leaned forward, his eyes intense. Would we have fought less? Loved each other better? Found a way to make it work? I don't know. The honesty of the admission felt like tearing open an old wound. I wanted a baby so desperately, but I wanted it with the man I married. The man who promised to love me through anything. By the time you left, I wasn't sure that man existed anymore. He existed, Kaylin said quietly. He was just scared. Scared of failing you, scared of not being the husband you needed, scared of watching you hurt yourself trying to become pregnant. So you left. So I left. He looked down at his hands. The worst decision I ever made. Emma stirred in Zaira's arms, making soft sleep sounds that reminded her so much of Kaylin it was almost painful. She had his restless way of moving, even in sleep. his expressive eyebrows that seemed to convey emotion even when his eyes were closed. "The gift," Zaira said suddenly, needing to change the subject before the weight of their history crushed them both. "What did you bring for Emma?" Kaylin reached for the bag, pulling out a small, beautifully wrapped package. Inside was a tiny silver bracelet with a single charm, a heart engraved with the words, "Daddy's girl." "It's too big for her now," he said quickly, as if embarrassed. "But I thought maybe someday when she's older." "Kaylin." Zaira's voice was thick with emotion. We can't just pretend that you're her father." "I am her father." The words came out with quiet force. "Biologically, genetically, I am Emma's father. And I know that complicates everything. I know it hurts Marcus. I know it makes your life harder, but I can't pretend she doesn't exist." "That's not what I'm asking you to do." "Then what are you asking?" Zaira looked around the apartment that should have been filled with Marcus's laughter, with the sounds of a happy family, with the life she'd carefully built after Kaylin destroyed the first one. "I'm asking you to understand that Marcus has been Emma's father in every way that matters for the past 9 months. He's the one who came to every doctor's appointment. He's the one who painted this nursery and built that crib and read parenting books and talked to my belly every night. He's the one who should be here right now, helping me figure out why Emma won't sleep for more than 2 hours at a time." "But he's not here," Kaylin pointed out, and there was an edge to his voice now. "He's not here because he found out she's not biologically his, and instead of fighting for the family he claims to love, he's hiding at his brother's place and returning baby clothes." "Don't you dare judge him," Zaira snapped, her protective instincts flaring. "Marcus is a good man who just had his entire world turned upside down. He has every right to need time to process this." "How much time?" Kaylin demanded. "How long does he get to punish you for something that wasn't your fault while I'm supposed to pretend I don't have a daughter?" "You don't get to make demands." Zaira stood up, Emma still in her arms, her voice rising despite her attempts to stay calm. "You don't get to waltz back into my life and start making claims about what's best for Emma or for me. You gave up that right when you walked away 3 years ago." "I walked away because we were destroying each other." "You walked away because you were a coward." The words hung in the air like a slap, and Emma began to cry, not the soft fussing of a sleepy baby, but the full-throated wail of distress that newborns produced when they sense tension in their environment. "Shoo, baby girl, it's okay," Zaira murmured, immediately shifting into soothing mode, her voice automatically dropping to the gentle tone that seemed to calm Emma better than anything else. But Emma wasn't having it. Her cries grew louder, more desperate, and nothing Zaira did seem to help. She tried rocking, tried changing positions, tried the pacifier, but Emma was inconsolable. "Let me try," Kaylin said quietly. "No, I can." "Zaira, let me try." Something in his voice made her look up, and she saw an expression she recognized from their marriage, the quiet confidence he brought to medical emergencies, the calm certainty that everything would be okay if people would just trust him to fix it. Reluctantly, she handed Emma to him, watching as he cradled their daughter with the natural ease of someone who had delivered hundreds of babies. He held her against his chest, one large hand supporting her head, and began to hum softly. The effect was immediate. Emma's cries subsided to whimpers, then to silence, as if she recognized something familiar in Kaylin's touch, in the rhythm of his heartbeat. "How did you?" Zaira started to ask, but then she remembered. The song he was humming. It was the same melody he used to hum when she couldn't sleep during their marriage, the one he claimed his mother had sung to him as a child. "She knows you," Zaira whispered, the realization hitting her like a revelation. "Somehow, she knows you're her father." Kaylin looked down at Emma, who had relaxed completely in his arms, her tiny fist curled around his finger in the same grip she'd had that first night in the hospital. "The night she was born," he said quietly, "when I was delivering her, I felt something. Like recognition. Like coming home to a place I'd never been before." "Kaylin." "I love her, Zaira." His voice was thick with emotion. I know I don't have the right. I know it complicates everything. But I love her already. More than I thought it was possible to love someone I just met. Tears burned Zaira's eyes as she watched her ex-husband hold their daughter, this man who had broken her heart and was now threatening to heal it in the most impossible way. "This is so messed up," she whispered. "Yeah," he agreed. "It is." The sound of a key in the front door made them both freeze. Marcus stood in the doorway, taking in the scene, Zaira in tears, Kaylin holding Emma, the intimacy of the moment that felt like a family portrait neither of them had planned to create. "I came to get my things," Marcus said quietly, his voice carefully controlled. "Marcus, please, let's talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about." He stepped into the apartment, but kept his distance from both of them. "You have a daughter with your ex-husband. I'm just the guy who was convenient when you needed someone to play house with." "That's not true, and you know it." "Do I?" Marcus's composure cracked slightly, showing the hurt underneath. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like the universe just gave you back everything you lost when your marriage ended. Your ex-husband, your dream of having children together, all of it tied up in one perfect little package." He gestured toward Kaylin and Emma, and Zaira could see the way his hands were shaking. "Look at them, Zaira. Look at how natural it looks, how right it looks. Tell me you don't see it too." She wanted to deny it, wanted to tell Marcus that what they had built together was real and important and worth fighting for. But looking at Kaylin cradling Emma, humming the melody that seemed to calm her in ways nothing else could, she couldn't find the words. "I'll be back tomorrow for the rest of my stuff," Marcus said, his voice hollow. "When he's not here." "Marcus, wait." But he was already gone, leaving behind only the echo of the door closing and the sound of Emma's peaceful breathing in the suddenly quiet apartment. "I should go," Kaylin said quietly, but he didn't move to hand Emma back. "Should you?" Zaira asked, and she wasn't sure if she was asking him to leave or to stay. "I don't know what I should do. I don't know what any of us should do." He looked at her, his eyes full of questions neither of them knew how to answer. "But I know I can't walk away from her. I can't walk away from Emma." "And what about me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, vulnerable and raw and far too honest. Kaylin's eyes met hers across the space that separated them, across 3 years of hurt and anger and carefully built walls. "I never walked away from you, Zaira. I walked away from the fight we were having, from the pain we were causing each other. But I never stopped loving you." The words hit her like lightning, illuminating everything she'd tried so hard to keep hidden in the darkness of her heart. "Don't," she whispered. "Don't say that. Don't make this harder than it already is. It's the truth. The truth is that you left me when I needed you most. The truth is that I had to rebuild my entire life without you. The truth is that Marcus is a good man who loves me and doesn't deserve to have his world destroyed because of our mistakes." "And what about what you deserve?" Kaylin asked quietly. "What about what Emma deserves?" Zaira looked at her daughter, so peaceful in her father's arms, and felt her carefully constructed world tilting on its axis once again. Outside, Seattle was waking up to another gray morning, but inside the apartment that should have been a happy family home, 3 adults were trying to figure out how to love the same child without destroying each other in the process. And for the first time since Emma's birth, Zaira wondered if love might not be enough to fix what they'd all broken. When someone you trusted completely walks away when you need them most, is it possible to ever fully forgive them? And what happens when circumstances force you back together? Can old wounds heal, or do they just tear open deeper? Share your thoughts on second chances and forgiveness. Sometimes the truth isn't just about what happened, it's about what someone was willing to sacrifice to make it happen. The law offices of Sterling, Mackenzie & Associates felt like a mausoleum, all marble floors and dark wood paneling that seemed designed to intimidate people into submission. Zaira sat in the uncomfortable leather chair, Emma sleeping peacefully in her car seat, while attorneys shuffled papers and discussed her life as if she weren't sitting right there. 2 weeks had passed since Marcus walked out. 2 weeks of sleepless nights, of learning to be a single mother, of ignoring Kaylin's daily calls and text messages asking if he could see Emma. 2 weeks of trying to convince herself that she could handle this alone, that she didn't need either of them complicating her life. But the letter from Pacific Northwest Fertility Clinic's legal team had shattered that illusion. They wanted to meet, wanted to discuss resolution options and liability limitations. They wanted to make this problem disappear with money and non-disclosure agreements. Mrs. Castellanos, excuse me, Ms. Castellanos, the lead attorney, a sharp-faced woman named Patricia Sterling, corrected herself with practiced smoothness. We understand this situation has caused significant emotional distress for all parties involved. Emotional distress, Zaira repeated flatly. Is that what you call destroying 3 people's lives? The clinic takes full responsibility for the administrative error that led to this unfortunate situation, Sterling continued, as if Zaira hadn't spoken. We're prepared to offer a substantial settlement to compensate for any damages. Damages. Zaira's voice was dangerously quiet. My daughter is not damages. She's not a mistake to be compensated for. Of course not, Sterling said quickly. Poor choice of words. What I meant to say is that we understand the complexity of your current situation, and we'd like to help resolve it in a way that benefits everyone involved. Zaira looked around the conference room, taking in the faces of the people who had reduced her daughter's existence to a line item in a legal settlement. The clinic administrator who had discovered the error. The lab technician who had made the administrative mistake. The lawyers who wanted to make it all go away. Where is Dr. Thorne? She asked suddenly. He was supposed to be here too. Sterling exchanged a glance with the clinic administrator. Dr. Thorne sends his regrets. He had an emergency surgery this morning. But Zaira could read people well enough to know when she was being lied to. He's not coming, is he? You asked him not to come. The silence that followed was answer enough. What aren't you telling me? Zaira demanded, her maternal instincts suddenly blazing to life. What about this situation has you so worried that you don't want Kaylin in the same room? Sterling's professional mask slipped slightly. Ms. Castellanos, perhaps we should focus on the settlement offer. No. Zaira stood up, her hands clenched into fists. I want to know what you're hiding. I want to know why you're so eager to throw money at this problem and make it disappear. The clinic administrator, a nervous man in his 50s, shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Ms. Castellanos, the error in question was a simple administrative mistake. These things happen in high-volume facilities. Bullshit. The word came out like a gunshot. I've been thinking about this for 2 weeks, going over every detail, and simple administrative mistakes don't explain what happened. You don't accidentally use the wrong genetic material. You don't accidentally store embryos that were supposed to be destroyed. This wasn't random chance. She began to pace, Emma's car seat in her arms, her mind racing through possibilities that made her stomach turn. Someone made a deliberate choice. Someone wanted this to happen. The question is why. The lawyers exchanged panicked glances, and Zaira knew she was right. This wasn't about incompetence. This was about something far more sinister. Dr. Patterson, she said suddenly, the name coming to her like a revelation. Dr. Patterson was the head of the fertility program when Kaylin and I were trying to conceive. He was also the doctor who oversaw my treatment when I came back with Marcus. The administrator's face went white. Oh my God, Zaira breathed, the pieces clicking together with horrifying clarity. He did this on purpose. Dr. Patterson deliberately used our embryo instead of Marcus's. Ms. Castellanos, you're making very serious accusations. Where is Dr. Patterson now? She demanded. Why isn't he here defending his clinic's reputation? Sterling cleared her throat. Dr. Patterson is no longer with the clinic. He resigned last month. Right after Emma was born. Right after the blood work revealed what he'd done. Zyra's voice was getting louder, and Emma stirred in her car seat. Why? Why would he do this? What possible reason could he have? She stopped mid-sentence, her blood running cold as another, even more terrible possibility occurred to her. Dr. Patterson delivered Marcus's sperm analysis, she said slowly. He was the one who told us that Marcus had a low sperm count, that we'd need to use fertility treatments to conceive. The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus's sperm count was normal, wasn't it? Zyra's voice was barely above a whisper. There was never anything wrong with him. Dr. Patterson lied so he could manipulate the situation, so he could use our embryo instead. One of the junior attorneys started to speak, but Sterling silenced him with a sharp look. But why? Zyra continued, her mind racing. What could he possibly gain from? She stopped, her eyes widening as the final, most devastating piece of the puzzle fell into place. Kaylin knew, she breathed. Somehow, Kaylin knew what Dr. Patterson was planning. The administrators looked like they wanted to disappear into their expensive chairs. That's why Kaylin was so available the night Emma was born. That's why he just happened to be covering for Dr. Martinez. That's why he knew exactly what to look for in the blood work. Her voice was gaining strength, fueled by a fury that threatened to consume her. You want to know why Dr. Thorne isn't here? It's because he can't look me in the eye and pretend he's innocent. Ms. Castellanos, Sterling said quickly, I think you're jumping to conclusions. Am I? Zyra whirled on her. Then explain to me how a simple administrative error resulted in the exact outcome that my ex-husband had been hoping for since our divorce. Explain to me how he just happened to be in the right place at the right time to deliver his own biological daughter. Explain to me how he knew to run blood tests that would reveal Emma's true parentage. The truth was crashing over her like a tsunami, destroying everything she believed about Emma's conception, about Kaylin's role in her life, about the miraculous coincidences that had brought them all together. Kaylin orchestrated this entire thing, she said, her voice hollow with shock. He paid Dr. Patterson to use our embryo. He arranged to be on call the night I went into labor. He planned every single detail to get back the family he walked away from. Emma began to cry, as if sensing her mother's distress, and the sound cut through Zyra's rage like a knife. She looked down at her daughter, this perfect, innocent child who had been conceived not through love or chance, but through manipulation and lies. How much? She asked quietly. Excuse me. Sterling looked confused. How much did my ex-husband pay Dr. Patterson to destroy my relationship with Marcus and force me back into his life? The administrator finally found his voice. Ms. Castellanos, I think you need to discuss this with Dr. Thorne directly. I'm discussing it with you. Right now. Zyra's voice was ice-cold. How much? Sterling sighed, recognizing that the truth was going to come out whether they cooperated or not. Dr. Patterson received a substantial anonymous donation to the clinic's research fund. $200,000. The donation came from an account linked to Dr. Thorne. The number hit Zyra like a physical blow. $200,000. Kaylin had paid $200,000 to manipulate her into having his child. When? She whispered. The donation was made 3 months after your divorce was finalized. Dr. Patterson's instructions were to watch for any future attempts at fertility treatment and to ensure that the outcome aligned with the donor's wishes. 3 months after our divorce, Zyra repeated numbly. He planned this from the beginning. The moment our marriage ended, he was already planning how to get me back. The lawyers were saying something about settlements and NDAs and legal protections, but their voices sounded like they were coming from underwater. All Zyra could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat and Emma's soft whimpers as she began to understand the full scope of what had been done to her. Kaylin hadn't just broken her heart. He'd orchestrated an elaborate scheme to force her back into his life, using her desperate desire for a child as a weapon against her. He destroyed her relationship with Marcus, compromised her trust in the medical system, and turned their daughter into an unwitting pawn in his game of manipulation. "I need to go," she said abruptly, gathering Emma's things with shaking hands. "Ms. Castellanos, we haven't discussed the settlement terms." "There's no settlement," Zaira said, her voice deadly calm. "There's no NDA. There's no making this go away quietly. What Dr. Patterson did was criminal. What my ex-husband did was criminal. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows about it." She was at the door when Sterling called out, "Ms. Castellanos, you should know, Dr. Thorne is planning to file for joint custody. His lawyers contacted us yesterday." The words stopped Zaira cold. "What?" "He's claiming parental rights based on biological paternity. Given the circumstances, and his financial resources, he has a strong case." Zaira turned back to face the room full of lawyers and administrators who had just delivered the final blow to her shattered world. "He planned this too," she said quietly. "The custody battle. Force me to have his child, then take her away from me when I don't fall back into his arms like a grateful ex-wife. We believe that's why he's been so cooperative with our investigation," Sterling admitted. "He wants to establish a pattern of responsibility and concern for the child's welfare." Zaira felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. Not just anger, but rage. Not just betrayal, but fury that threatened to consume everything in its path. "You want to know what Dr. Thorne's pattern really is," she said, her voice carrying a quiet menace that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. "He's a man who destroys what he claims to love, then manipulates circumstances to get it back when he realizes what he's lost. But this time, he picked the wrong woman to manipulate." She headed for the door again, Emma secure in her car seat, her mind already racing ahead to what came next. "Ms. Castellanos," Sterling called out desperately, "what are you going to do?" Zaira paused in the doorway, looking back at the room full of people who had enabled Kalen's deception. "I'm going to do what I should have done the day he walked out of our marriage," she said. "I'm going to fight back." The elevator doors closed on their panicked faces, leaving Zaira alone with Emma and the devastating knowledge that the man she had once loved enough to marry, once trusted enough to share her deepest dreams with, had manipulated their daughter's very existence for his own selfish purposes. But as she looked down at Emma's peaceful face, one thought burned bright through her fury. Kalen may have orchestrated Emma's conception, but Emma belonged to her. And she would die before she let him use their daughter as a pawn in whatever sick game he was playing. The elevator reached the ground floor, and Zaira stepped out into the Seattle afternoon with war in her heart and a battle plan already forming in her mind. Dr. Kalen Thorne was about to discover what happened when you manipulated the wrong woman's life. And it wasn't going to be pretty. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted had been manipulating your life from behind the scenes? How far would you go to protect your child from someone who claimed to love them but had ulterior motives? This revelation changes everything. What do you think Zaira should do next? In the depths of betrayal, we discover not just who we really are, but who we have the strength to become. The knock on Zaira's door came at 6:47 a.m., sharp and official and carrying the weight of legal authority. Emma had been crying for 3 hours straight, her tiny fists clenched with a kind of inconsolable distress that made Zaira's chest ache with helplessness. She hadn't slept in 36 hours. Her coffee had gone cold hours ago. Her hair was unwashed, her clothes wrinkled, and she looked exactly like what she was, a woman at the end of her rope. "Ms. Castellanos?" The man at her door was middle-aged, professionally dressed, and holding an official-looking folder that made Zaira's stomach drop. "I'm David Chun, from Child Protective Services. I need to speak with you about Emma Claire Rodriguez." The words hit her like ice water. "CPS? Why are you here?" "We received a complaint expressing concern for the child's welfare. May I come in?" Zaira's hands tightened on Emma, who was still crying despite her mother's desperate attempts to soothe her. "What kind of complaint?" "The caller expressed concern about your ability to provide adequate care for a newborn, given your current emotional state and living situation. They mentioned that you've been isolated, that the father of the child is not present, and that there may be issues with your mental health. The blood drained from Zaira's face. Someone called CPS on me? Who? But even as she asked the question, she knew. There was only one person with both the motivation and the medical knowledge to make such a call sound credible. Kaylin. I'd rather not discuss the identity of the caller, Chen said diplomatically. But I do need to conduct a welfare check. Standard procedure in cases like this. Cases like this. As if Emma were a statistic, a file number, a problem to be solved rather than a precious child who was loved beyond measure. Of course, Zaira said, stepping aside to let him in, her mind racing. But I should tell you, Emma's been fussy today. She's not usually like this. She's normally a very calm baby. She was babbling, she knew, but she couldn't stop herself. The apartment looked like a disaster zone, baby clothes scattered everywhere, empty coffee cups on every surface, unopened bills piled on the counter. It looked exactly like the home of a woman who was struggling to hold her life together. Which, she supposed, was exactly what she was. Chen walked through the apartment with the practiced eye of someone who had seen every kind of domestic situation imaginable. He noted the empty refrigerator, she'd been too exhausted to grocery shop, the overflowing laundry basket, when was she supposed to find time for housework, the stack of legal documents on the kitchen table, the custody papers Kaylin's lawyers had served her 2 days ago. Ms. Castellanos, how many hours of sleep did you get last night? I don't know. A few. Emma's been going through a growth spurt, so she's been eating every hour and a half. Are you receiving any help with child care? Family support. Zaira's throat tightened. My parents are dead. I don't have any siblings. Marcus, Mr. Rodriguez, he's not in the picture right now. What about Dr. Thorne? I understand he's the biological father. There it was. The trap that Kaylin had set for her, sprung with perfect timing. Dr. Thorne and I are in the middle of a custody dispute, she said carefully. I'm not comfortable having him here unsupervised. Chen made a note on his pad. Has Dr. Thorne made any threats? Any attempts to take the child without your permission? Not exactly, but... Has he provided any financial support for Emma's care? He's tried to, but I don't want his money. The words came out more sharply than she intended, and she saw Chen's eyebrows raise slightly. Ms. Castellanos, is there anyone who can verify that you've been caring appropriately for Emma? A pediatrician, perhaps. Dr. Sarah Martinez at Seattle General. She's been Emma's doctor since birth. Zaira felt a flicker of hope. Sarah had seen her with Emma multiple times, had complimented her on her natural maternal instincts. I'll need to contact Dr. Martinez, Chen said, making another note. In the meantime, I'm going to need to document Emma's current condition. He approached them, and Zaira instinctively stepped back, clutching Emma tighter. The baby's cries intensified, as if sensing the tension in the room. Ms. Castellanos, I need you to relax. Your stress is affecting the baby. But Zaira couldn't relax. All she could think about was Kaylin's threat to file for custody, about the way he'd manipulated Emma's very existence, about how he was now using the system against her to prove she was an unfit mother. She's not usually like this, Zaira said desperately as Emma's cries reached a fever pitch. She's normally so calm, so happy. She's just having a bad day. When was Emma's last pediatric checkup? Last week. Everything was perfect. She's gaining weight appropriately, hitting all her developmental milestones. And how are you doing, Ms. Castellanos? Emotionally, I mean. Have you spoken to anyone about the stress of single motherhood? Single motherhood. The words felt like a verdict, a judgment on her ability to provide for Emma alone. I'm fine, she lied, even as exhaustion weighed down her every word. I'm handling everything just fine. But even as she said it, she knew how it sounded, how she looked. A woman barely holding it together, isolated and overwhelmed, with a screaming baby in an apartment that looked like a hurricane had hit it. Chen's phone buzzed, and he stepped aside to take the call. Zaira caught fragments of the conversation. Biological father. Substantial resources. Child's best interests. When he hung up, his expression was grim. Ms. Castellanos, that was Dr. Thorne's attorney. He's filed an emergency motion for temporary custody, citing concerns about Emma's immediate welfare. The words hit her like a physical blow. What does that mean? It means there's going to be a hearing tomorrow morning. A judge will decide whether Emma should remain in your care or be placed temporarily with Dr. Thorne pending a full custody evaluation. The room tilted around Zaira as the full scope of Kaylin's plan became clear. He hadn't just orchestrated Emma's conception, he'd orchestrated her destruction as a mother. The CPS call, the emergency custody motion, even the timing of it all when she was at her most vulnerable, it was all part of his calculated scheme to take Emma away from her. "I need to call my lawyer," she said, but even as she said it, she remembered the stack of bills on her counter. She couldn't afford a custody battle with someone of Kaylin's resources. She couldn't afford the kind of legal representation that could fight his team of high-powered attorneys. "That's your right," Chen agreed. "But Ms. Castellanos, I have to ask, do you have somewhere Emma could stay tonight? A friend, perhaps? Someone who could help you get some rest and create a more stable environment." The suggestion was reasonable, well-meaning, and utterly devastating. Because it meant he thought she was failing as a mother. It meant he thought Emma would be better off somewhere else. "There's no one," she whispered, the truth of her isolation hitting her like a sledgehammer. Marcus was gone. Her parents were dead. She had work colleagues but no real friends. Her relationship with Marcus had consumed most of her social energy, and before that, she'd been too busy rebuilding her life after Kaylin to form deep connections. She was completely, utterly alone. Emma's cries suddenly stopped, and in the silence that followed, Zaira heard the sound of her own heart breaking. She looked down at her daughter, this perfect little person who deserved so much more than a mother who was falling apart at the seams. "Maybe," she said quietly, the words feeling like they were being torn from her throat, "maybe it would be better if she stayed with Dr. Thorne. Just for tonight. Just until I can get some sleep and figure things out." Ms. Castellanos. "I'm not a bad mother," she said fiercely, tears streaming down her face. "I love her more than my own life. But I can't do this alone. I can't fight him and take care of her and keep it together all at the same time." Chen's expression softened with something that might have been sympathy. Single parenthood is one of the hardest things in the world. There's no shame in asking for help. But it felt like shame. It felt like failure. It felt like everything Kaylin had counted on when he'd set this elaborate trap in motion. "I'll need to contact Dr. Thorne," Chen continued. "Arrange for a temporary placement while we sort this out." Zaira nodded numbly, clutching Emma close while she still could. She breathed in her daughter's sweet baby scent, memorized the weight of her in her arms, tried to burn the feeling of holding her child into her memory. Because in a few hours, Emma would be gone. The phone rang, and Zaira heard Chen speaking to someone, presumably Kaylin, about pickup arrangements and temporary custody protocols. His voice sounded like it was coming from very far away, like everything was happening to someone else. 20 minutes later, there was another knock on the door. This time, it was Kaylin. He stood in her doorway looking perfectly put together, rested, confident, wearing an expensive suit that spoke of success and stability. Everything she wasn't right now. Everything a judge would want to see in a custodial parent. "Hello, Zaira," he said quietly. She wanted to rage at him, to scream about his manipulation and his lies and his calculated destruction of her life. But Emma was in her arms, and she couldn't bear the thought of her daughter's last moments with her being filled with anger and shouting. "You won," she said simply. "Are you happy?" Something flickered in Kaylin's eyes, regret, maybe, or guilt, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. "This isn't about winning. This is about Emma's well-being. Don't. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Don't pretend this is noble. Don't pretend you're doing this for her. We both know exactly what this is. Kalen had the grace not to argue. He simply stood there waiting, while Chen explained the temporary custody arrangements and the court hearing scheduled for the following morning. When it came time to hand Emma over, Zaira thought she might die from the pain of it. Emma looked so small in Kalen's arms, so vulnerable, and every instinct Zaira possessed screamed at her to snatch her daughter back and run. But where could she go? What could she do? Kalen had money, connections, legal resources. He had planned this perfectly, anticipated her every move, and now she was exactly where he wanted her, broken, alone, and separated from the one thing in the world that mattered to her. "I'll take good care of her," Kalen said as they reached the door. Zaira looked at him, really looked at him, and saw not the man she had once loved, not the doctor who had saved Emma's life, but the architect of her destruction. "You already took everything from me once," she said quietly. "My marriage, my dreams, my ability to trust anyone. But I survived that. I rebuilt my life, found someone who loved me, learned to be happy again." She paused, watching Emma sleep peacefully in his arms, completely unaware that her world was being torn apart. "But this," she continued, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face, "taking my daughter away from me, using her as a weapon against me, this is unforgivable. This is the one thing I will never ever forgive you for." Kalen's jaw tightened. "Zaira, get out of my apartment. Take Emma, take your victory, take whatever sick satisfaction you get from destroying my life. But know this, I'm not done fighting. I will never stop fighting for my daughter." After they left, Zaira sank to her knees in the middle of her empty apartment and sobbed until she had no tears left. Outside, night was falling over Seattle, and somewhere across the city, her daughter was sleeping in the arms of the man who had manipulated her very existence into being. But as Zaira knelt there in the wreckage of her life, surrounded by the silence that Emma's absence had left behind, something began to crystallize in her chest. Not just grief, not just rage, but something harder and more dangerous. Purpose. Kalen had made one crucial mistake in his elaborate scheme. He had underestimated what a mother would do to protect her child. And tomorrow, he was going to learn exactly how much fight she had left in her. When someone uses your greatest love against you as a weapon, how far would you go to fight back? Sometimes the people who know us best know exactly how to destroy us, but they also underestimate how that same knowledge can make us stronger. What do you think Zaira's next move should be? A mother's love doesn't break under pressure. It transforms into something unbreakable. At 3:17 a.m., sitting on the floor of her empty apartment with her laptop balanced on her knees, Zaira found the first crack in Kalen's perfect facade. She had been digging for 6 hours straight, fueled by coffee and righteous fury, following every digital trail she could find. Medical licensing boards, hospital disciplinary records, professional associations, court filings from other custody cases. Anywhere that might hold evidence of what kind of man Dr. Kalen Michael Thorne really was. And there, buried in the archives of the Washington State Medical Board, was a complaint filed 18 months ago by a Dr. Jennifer Walsh. Dr. Thorne engaged in a pattern of professional harassment and personal intimidation after I ended our relationship. He used his position and influence to undermine my credibility with colleagues and attempted to have my hospital privileges revoked through false accusations of professional misconduct. Zaira's hands trembled as she read the complaint. Jennifer Walsh. She remembered the name now. Kalen had mentioned her casually during their marriage. A fellow physician he'd worked with at Seattle General. He'd claimed they were just colleagues, nothing more. But according to this complaint, they dated for 6 months. And when Dr. Walsh had tried to end the relationship, Kalen had made her professional life hell. The complaint had been dismissed due to insufficient evidence, but as Zaira dug deeper, she found more breadcrumbs. A transfer request from Dr. Walsh to a hospital in Portland. A resignation letter that mentioned hostile work environment and personal safety concerns. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had fled Seattle to escape Kaylin, just like Zaira had tried to do after their divorce. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and for one wild moment, her heart leaped, thinking it might be news about Emma. Instead, it was from an unknown number. I saw the news about the custody case. We need to talk. Marcus. The news. Zaira quickly Googled her own name and felt her stomach drop. The story was already out there, spreading across social media and local news sites. Prominent Seattle doctor fights for custody of child conceived through fertility clinic error. Of course Kaylin had leaked it. Of course he'd spun it to make himself look like the responsible father fighting for his rights, while she was portrayed as the unstable ex-wife trying to keep a child from her biological father. She called Marcus back immediately. Jesus, Zaira, what the hell is happening? His voice was tight with concern and something that sounded like regret. The news is making it sound like you've been lying about Emma's paternity this whole time. That's not, Marcus, it's not what it looks like. Kaylin manipulated the entire situation. He paid the fertility clinic to use our embryo instead of. I know. The words stopped her cold. I know about Dr. Patterson. I know about the money. How do you? Because I hired a private investigator the day I left your apartment. I needed to understand what happened, needed to know if there was any way that Emma could still be mine. His voice cracked slightly. I couldn't accept that I wasn't her father without being absolutely certain. Zaira closed her eyes, overwhelmed by a rush of gratitude so intense it made her dizzy. Marcus. The PI found everything, Zaira. The payments to Patterson. The bribes to clinic staff. The way Kaylin arranged to be on call the night you went into labor. All of it. Why didn't you tell me? There was a long pause. Because I was angry. Because I felt like an idiot for not seeing it sooner. Because I couldn't figure out how to separate my feelings about what Kaylin did to us from my feelings about Emma. Zaira sank back against the couch, her laptop sliding to the floor. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I'm sorry you got dragged into his sick game. I'm sorry about all of it. Don't apologize for being victimized, Zaira. Apologize for not trusting me enough to fight this together. The gentle rebuke hit her harder than anger would have. He was right. She had been so focused on protecting everyone from the chaos of her life that she'd pushed away the one person who might have been able to help her. Where are you? She asked. Downstairs. In your parking garage. I've been sitting here for an hour trying to decide whether to come up. Come up, she said without hesitation. Please come up. 20 minutes later, Marcus was sitting across from her at the kitchen table, a thick manila folder spread between them. The evidence his private investigator had gathered was damning. Bank records, medical files, recorded phone conversations between Kaylin and Dr. Patterson. This is enough to destroy him, Zaira said, leafing through the documents. This is criminal fraud, bribery, conspiracy. It's also going to destroy you, Marcus pointed out quietly. When this comes out, everyone's going to know that Emma was conceived through manipulation and lies. The media attention alone will follow her for the rest of her life. Zaira looked up at him, this man who had every right to walk away from the chaos that Kaylin had created, who had instead spent his own money and time gathering evidence to help her. Why are you doing this? She asked. Why are you helping me? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring down at his hands. When he finally looked up, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. Because for 9 months, Emma was my daughter. I talked to her every night when she was in your belly. I bought her clothes and built her crib and dreamed about teaching her to ride a bike and helping her with homework. His voice grew stronger. Kaylin may be her biological father, but I'm the one who chose to love her before she was even born. The words hit Zaira like a revelation. Biology wasn't everything. Love was a choice, and Marcus had chosen Emma just as completely as if she shared his DNA. I can't ask you to fight this battle with me, she said quietly. Kaylin has unlimited resources. This could get ugly in ways we can't even imagine. You're not asking. I'm volunteering. Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. Besides, you're forgetting something important. Kaylin may have money and connections, but he's also a narcissist who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. And narcissists always make one crucial mistake. What's that? They underestimate everyone around them. Marcus was right. Kaylin had orchestrated this elaborate scheme assuming that Zaira would crumble under pressure, that Marcus would walk away permanently, that no one would think to dig deeper into his past or question his motives. But he hadn't counted on Marcus's loyalty. He hadn't counted on Zaira's determination. And he definitely hadn't counted on Dr. Jennifer Walsh. We need to find her, Zaira said suddenly. Dr. Walsh. If she's willing to testify about Kaylin's pattern of manipulation and harassment. Already on it. Marcus pulled out his phone and showed her a contact entry. Jennifer Walsh, MD. Currently working at Portland General Hospital. My PI tracked her down yesterday. And she's very interested in talking to you. Apparently, she's been waiting 3 years for someone to take Kaylin Thorne down. Hope blazed to life in Zaira's chest for the first time since Emma had been taken from her arms. Not just hope for getting her daughter back, but hope for something bigger, justice for all the women Kaylin had manipulated and destroyed in his quest to get what he wanted. There's something else, Marcus said, pulling out another document. My PI found evidence that you weren't Kaylin's only target. Zaira's blood ran cold. What do you mean? He's done this before. Different clinic, different woman, but the same pattern. 2 years ago, a Dr. Rebecca Chen in Portland had fertility treatments that resulted in pregnancy with embryos that were supposed to have been destroyed from her previous relationship. With Kaylin. Dr. Chen fought the custody battle and lost. Kaylin got joint custody of their son. The revelation hit Zaira like a thunderbolt. This wasn't about love or regret or wanting their family back. This was a pattern of predatory behavior, a systematic campaign to create children he could use to maintain control over the women in his past. Where is Dr. Chen now? Dead, Marcus said quietly. Car accident 6 months ago. But her sister has been fighting to get custody of the little boy ever since. She claims Kaylin was emotionally abusive and that Rebecca was planning to take the child and disappear when she died. Zaira stared at the documents, her mind racing with the implications. Kaylin wasn't just a manipulative ex-husband. He was a serial predator who used his medical knowledge and financial resources to trap women in permanent connections to him. Emma wasn't his daughter. She was his victim. We have to stop him, she said, her voice fierce with determination. Not just for Emma, but for Dr. Chen's son, for Dr. Walsh, for whoever his next target might be. Agreed. But Zaira, you need to understand what we're up against. Kaylin has spent years building his reputation and his network. He has judges who golf with him, colleagues who owe him favors, politicians whose campaigns he's funded. Taking him down isn't going to be as simple as presenting evidence. Then what do you suggest? Marcus smiled, and for the first time since this nightmare began, it reached his eyes. I suggest we play his own game against him. We make him think he's winning right up until the moment we destroy him. At 6 a.m., as the Seattle dawn painted the sky in shades of hope and determination, Zaira and Marcus began planning the most important battle of their lives. Across the city, in Kaylin's expensive penthouse apartment, Emma was sleeping peacefully in a nursery that had been hastily assembled by his housekeeper. She had no idea that her entire future hung in the balance, that 3 adults were preparing for war over the right to love and protect her. But her mother, her real mother, the woman who had carried her for 9 months and would fight for her until her last breath, was no longer the broken woman who had collapsed on her apartment floor the night before. That woman was gone, transformed by purpose and fury and the unbreakable bond between a mother and her child. In her place stood someone far more dangerous, a woman with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Kaylin Thorne was about to learn what happened when you pushed a mother too far. And it was going to be the most expensive lesson of his life. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but what about justice? When someone uses your deepest love against you, is it revenge or justice to use their own tactics to bring them down? What do you think Zaira and Marcus should do with all this evidence? The strongest weapon against manipulation is truth, wielded by those who refuse to be silenced. The King County Family Court was packed with reporters, curious onlookers, and what looked like half of Seattle's medical community. Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern woman in her 60s with silver hair and no tolerance for drama, gavelled the session to order with the efficiency of someone who had seen every kind of family dispute imaginable. This is an emergency hearing for temporary custody of the minor child Emma Claire Rodriguez, she announced. Dr. Kaylin Thorne, represented by Harrison and Associates, is requesting temporary custody based on concerns about the child's welfare. Ms. Zaira Castellanos, represented by... She paused, looking at the papers. Your Honor, Marcus stood up from the plaintiff's table. I am Marcus Rodriguez, and I'll be representing Ms. Castellanos pro se, with the assistance of attorney David Kim. A murmur ran through the courtroom. It was unusual for a non-attorney to represent someone in family court, but Marcus had spent the last 24 hours studying Washington state custody law with the same methodical precision he brought to debugging code. Kaylin's lead attorney, Thomas Harrison, was a silver-haired man in an expensive suit who radiated the kind of confidence that came from winning 90% of his cases. He rose smoothly to address the court. Your Honor, my client is a respected physician who has recently discovered that he is the biological father of 3-week-old Emma Rodriguez. Dr. Thorne is seeking temporary custody due to legitimate concerns about the child's welfare in the current living situation. What specific concerns? Judge Morrison asked. Ms. Castellanos is currently living alone with no family support system. She has been struggling with what appears to be postpartum depression, as evidenced by a recent CPS evaluation. The child has been observed in distress, crying for hours at a time, and the mother appears unable to provide adequate care. Harrison painted a picture of Zaira as an unstable single mother while portraying Kaylin as a concerned father who only wanted what was best for his child. It was masterfully done, and Zaira could see several people in the gallery nodding along. Mr. Rodriguez, Judge Morrison said, turning to Marcus. What is your response to these allegations? Marcus stood up, and when he spoke, his voice was calm and steady. Your Honor, Dr. Thorne is indeed Emma's biological father. But biology is only one piece of this puzzle, and I believe the court needs to understand the full picture before making any decisions about this child's future. He moved to the evidence table and picked up a thick folder. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that Dr. Thorne's sudden interest in fatherhood is not motivated by love or concern for Emma's welfare, but by a pattern of predatory behavior that spans several years and multiple victims. Harrison jumped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor. This is a custody hearing, not a character assassination. Mr. Rodriguez is not qualified to. Your Honor, Marcus interrupted smoothly, I believe the court will find this evidence directly relevant to the question of what's in Emma's best interests. Judge Morrison looked intrigued despite herself. I'll allow it. But make it quick, Mr. Rodriguez. Marcus nodded and addressed the court with the confidence of someone who had spent years presenting complex technical information to skeptical audiences. Your Honor, Emma Rodriguez was not conceived through natural means or even through legitimate fertility treatments. She exists because Dr. Thorne paid Dr. Richard Patterson of Pacific Northwest Fertility Clinic $200,000 to manipulate Ms. Castellanos' fertility treatments. The courtroom erupted in shocked whispers. Judge Morrison banged her gavel for silence. Dr. Patterson was instructed to use embryos created during Dr. Thorne and Ms. Castellanos' marriage instead of using my genetic material, despite the fact that those embryos were supposed to have been destroyed following their divorce. Marcus pulled out bank records and medical documents, handing copies to the judge and to Harrison, whose confident demeanor was beginning to crack. "This was not an accident, Your Honor. This was a calculated scheme to force Ms. Castellanos back into Dr. Thorne's life by creating a biological connection he could exploit." "This is preposterous," Harrison sputtered. "These are serious allegations that require—" "Dr. Patterson has already confessed," Marcus said calmly, producing another document. His signed statement, given to the FBI yesterday, details the entire conspiracy. The courtroom went dead silent. Even Judge Morrison leaned forward with interest. "Furthermore," Marcus continued, "this is not the first time Dr. Thorne has engaged in this behavior. Your Honor, I'd like to call Dr. Jennifer Walsh to the stand." A tall woman with auburn hair stood up from the gallery. She was impeccably dressed and carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being taken seriously in professional settings. "Dr. Walsh," Marcus said after she was sworn in, "please tell the court about your relationship with Dr. Thorne." Jennifer's voice was clear and steady. "I dated Kalen Thorne for approximately 6 months, 3 years ago. When I ended the relationship, he began a campaign of professional harassment designed to destroy my career and force me to leave Seattle." "Can you be more specific?" "He filed false complaints about my medical competency with the hospital board. He spread rumors about my personal life to colleagues. He used his influence to have me excluded from important committees and research opportunities. When I finally filed a complaint against him, he escalated his behavior to the point where I feared for my physical safety." Harrison stood up. "Your Honor, this testimony is completely irrelevant to—" "It establishes a pattern," Judge Morrison said sharply. "Continue, Dr. Walsh." "I eventually had to transfer to Portland to escape the hostile work environment he created. But even then, he wasn't finished. Last year, he somehow obtained personal information about my fertility treatments and attempted to contact the clinic where I was being treated. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Kalen had been planning to do to Jennifer what he'd successfully done to Zaira." "Dr. Walsh," Marcus said, "are you aware of other women who have experienced similar treatment from Dr. Thorne?" "Yes. Dr. Rebecca Chun in Portland. She contacted me 2 years ago because she was going through the same thing. Unexplained pregnancy using old embryos, custody battle, harassment campaign. Rebecca was planning to take her son and leave the state when she died in what police ruled an accident." The courtroom exploded in noise. Judge Morrison had to bang her gavel repeatedly to restore order. "Your Honor," Harrison said desperately, "these are unsubstantiated allegations." "Actually," a new voice said from the back of the courtroom, "they're not." Everyone turned to see a woman in an FBI windbreaker walking down the center aisle, followed by 2 agents and a man Zaira recognized as Detective Mike Santos from Seattle PD. "Special Agent Lisa Chun," the woman announced, flashing her badge. "Dr. Thorne, you're under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, medical fraud, and violation of federal reproductive rights laws." The courtroom descended into chaos as the FBI agents moved toward Kalen, who had gone white as a sheet. His expensive attorneys were frantically whispering among themselves, but there was nothing they could do to stop what was happening. "This is a mistake," Kalen said, his voice shaky for the first time since Zaira had known him. "I was protecting my parental rights." "You were manipulating reproductive material to create unwanted pregnancies for the purpose of maintaining control over your victims," Agent Chun said crisply as she handcuffed him. Dr. Patterson's testimony, combined with financial records and testimony from multiple victims, paints a very clear picture of criminal behavior. As the agents led Kalen away, he looked back at Zaira with an expression she'd never seen before, not anger, not manipulation, but genuine fear. "Zaira," he called out desperately. "Emma needs her father. Don't let them take me away from her." "You were never her father," Zaira said, her voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. "You were just the donor. There's a difference." After Kalen was removed, Judge Morrison addressed the court with obvious relief. "Well, This certainly clarifies the custody question. Ms. Castellanos, I'm ordering Emma returned to your care immediately. Mr. Rodriguez, given your role as the intended father and your clear commitment to this child's welfare, I'm also granting you legal standing to pursue adoption proceedings if you choose. Marcus looked at Zaira, and she saw everything they'd been through reflected in his eyes. The pain, the betrayal, the fight to save their family. We choose, Zaira said, taking his hand. We both choose Emma. 2 hours later, they stood in the lobby of Seattle General Hospital, where Emma had been brought for a medical evaluation during the custody proceedings. The same hallways where this nightmare had begun 3 weeks ago now felt like the setting for a different kind of miracle. Dr. Sarah Martinez approached them with Emma in her arms, the baby calm and alert after her ordeal. She's perfectly healthy, Sarah said with a smile. No signs of distress or neglect. In fact, she seems remarkably well adjusted for everything she's been through. Zaira took Emma into her arms and felt the missing piece of her heart click back into place. Emma looked up at her with those dark eyes. Not Kaylin's eyes, she realized now, just Emma's eyes, and made a soft sound that might have been recognition or contentment or just the simple pleasure of being held by the person who loved her most. I'm sorry, Zaira whispered, pressing her lips to Emma's forehead. I'm so sorry I let him take you away from me. She knows, Marcus said quietly, reaching out to stroke Emma's tiny hand. She knows you fought for her. Outside the hospital, the Seattle evening was crisp and clear, the kind of night that made the city's skyline look like something from a postcard. They walked to Marcus's car together, not the family they'd planned to be, but the family they'd chosen to become. As Marcus buckled Emma's car seat into the back, Zaira's phone buzzed with a text from Detective Santos. Patterson confessed to manipulating treatments for 12 other women over the past 5 years. FBI estimates Thorne has at least 8 biological children he's used for custody manipulation. You breaking the pattern saved lives. Zaira showed the text to Marcus, who whistled low. 12 other women, he said quietly. Jesus. But it's over now, Zaira said, though she knew that wasn't entirely true. There would be trials, testimony, media attention. Other victims would come forward. The legal ramifications would take years to sort out. But the part that mattered, the part about Emma being safe and loved and home where she belonged, that was over. So what happens now? Marcus asked as they drove through the Seattle streets toward home. Zaira looked back at Emma, who was sleeping peacefully despite the chaos that had surrounded her entire short life. Now we go home, she said. We put her in the crib you built. We read her the books you bought. We love her the way we always planned to love her. Even though she's not biologically mine. Zaira reached over and took his hand. Especially because she's not biologically yours. Because that means you chose her, Marcus. Out of all the children in the world, you chose to love Emma Rodriguez. Emma Rodriguez Castellanos, he corrected with a smile. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. As they pulled into their parking garage, Zaira felt something she hadn't experienced in weeks: peace. Not the fragile temporary peace of avoiding conflict, but the deep, unshakable peace that came from knowing you were exactly where you belonged. Emma stirred in her car seat as they took the elevator up to their apartment, making the soft sounds that meant she was waking up hungry. Normal baby sounds, normal baby needs, after weeks of nothing being normal. I'll warm a bottle, Marcus said as they walked into the apartment that finally felt like home again. I'll change your diaper, Zaira replied, lifting Emma from her car seat. Simple words, simple tasks, but they carried the weight of every choice they'd made to get to this moment. The choice to fight for each other. The choice to love a child regardless of biology. The choice to become a family not through genetics or legal documents, but through the simple act of choosing each other, every day, no matter what. As Zaira changed Emma's diaper on the changing table Marcus had assembled with such care, she looked down at her daughter, their daughter, and made one final promise. No one will ever use you as a weapon again, little girl. No one will ever make you into something you're not. You get to choose who you become, who you love, who your family is. And right now, your family is me and Marcus and all the people who are going to love you just because you're you. Emma looked up at her with those serious dark eyes, and for just a moment, Zaira could swear she understood every word. From the kitchen came the sound of Marcus humming while he prepared Emma's bottle, not a lullaby, but something soft and comforting that spoke of home and safety and love. Outside, Seattle sparkled with promise under the clear night sky. And in apartment 4B, a family that had been broken and rebuilt and tested by fire settled in for their first quiet evening together, whole at last. Justice served, family restored, and love triumphant. When the dust settles and the battles are won, sometimes the greatest victory is simply being able to go home together. What did you think of seeing Kalen finally face the consequences of his actions? And which moment in this courtroom showdown hit you the hardest? The greatest stories aren't about perfect beginnings. They're about beautiful transformations and the families we choose to become. 1 year later. The October sun streamed through the windows of their new house in Queen Anne, casting golden light across the hardwood floors that Emma was just beginning to navigate on wobbly legs. She pulled herself up against the coffee table with determination that reminded Zaira of herself, stubborn, persistent, and absolutely certain she could conquer whatever challenge stood in front of her. Da-da-da-da. Emma babbled, reaching chubby hands toward Marcus, who was sitting on the floor assembling what appeared to be the most complicated toy kitchen known to mankind. "I know, Em," Marcus said, glancing up from the instruction manual with the exaggerated patience of a man who had spent 3 hours trying to attach cabinet door B to frame assembly C. "Daddy's being very slow with your birthday present." Emma's first birthday. The milestone that had seemed impossible during those dark weeks when she'd been taken away, when Zaira had thought she might lose her daughter forever to a man who saw children as possessions rather than people to be loved. Now, 12 months later, Emma was thriving in ways that took Zaira's breath away every single day. She was walking well, stumbling enthusiastically, talking mostly gibberish, but very opinionated gibberish, and developing a personality that was purely her own, not Kalen's, not Zaira's, but entirely Emma Rodriguez Castellanos. "Need help?" Zaira asked, settling onto the floor next to Marcus with 2 cups of coffee and the knowing smile of someone who had watched him wrestle with assembly instructions many times before. "I've got it," Marcus insisted, then immediately held up 2 identical-looking pieces. "Okay, I don't got it. Which one of these is supposed to be the oven door?" Emma solved the problem by crawling over and grabbing both pieces, immediately trying to put them in her mouth with the single-minded focus that defined her approach to everything new and interesting. "No," Zaira laughed, gently extracting the hardware from her daughter's grip. "Those aren't teething toys." "Mama." Emma protested, then launched into what sounded like a very serious lecture about the injustice of being denied perfectly good chewing materials. Watching Marcus and Emma interact never failed to fill Zaira with wonder. There was no hesitation in their bond, no awkwardness or uncertainty. From the moment Emma had been returned to them, she had claimed Marcus as completely and unconditionally as if they shared DNA. Biology, it turned out, was irrelevant when it came to love. The adoption had been finalized 3 months ago, in a courtroom ceremony that was the opposite of the nightmare they'd endured a year earlier. Judge Morrison, the same judge who had presided over the custody hearing, had smiled as she made it official. Marcus Rodriguez was legally, permanently, and irrevocably Emma's father. "You know," Zaira said, settling Emma on her lap while Marcus continued his battle with the toy kitchen, "I was thinking about the birth announcement we never sent. The one where we couldn't figure out how to explain that our daughter was conceived through fertility fraud and delivered by a criminal mastermind." Marcus asked dryly. "That's the one." Zaira bounced Emma gently, making her giggle with delight. "I finally figured out what it should say." "Oh yeah? What's that?" Emma Rodriguez Castellanos. Born October 15th. Loved beyond measure by parents who chose each other and chose her, every single day. Marcus looked up from the instruction manual, his expression soft with a kind of love that had nothing to do with genetics and everything to do with choice. "I like it," he said. "Simple. True. Perfect. Emma, apparently deciding that the adults were taking too long to provide adequate entertainment, pushed off from Zyra's lap and toddled unsteadily toward the kitchen, where something had caught her attention. "She's getting fast," Marcus observed, abandoning the toy kitchen to follow their daughter. "Too fast," Zyra agreed, but she was smiling as she said it. The doorbell rang, and Zyra went to answer it, expecting the grocery delivery she'd ordered for Emma's birthday party the next day. Instead, she found Dr. Sarah Martinez standing on their front porch, holding a wrapped present and wearing the kind of smile that meant she had good news to share. "Sarah, you're early for the party. It's not until tomorrow." "I know, but I couldn't wait to give you this." Sarah held out an official-looking envelope along with the wrapped gift. "It came to the hospital addressed to Emma, but I thought you should see it first." Zyra opened the envelope, scanning the legal document inside with growing amazement. "Marcus," she called out, "you need to see this." He appeared in the doorway with Emma on his hip, both of them wearing matching expressions of curiosity. "What is it?" he asked. "It's from the class action settlement," Zyra said, her voice thick with emotion. "The one against the fertility clinic and Kaylin's estate. Emma's been awarded $2.3 million in damages, to be held in trust until she turns 18. The number hung in the air between them, significant not because of the money itself, but because of what it represented, acknowledgement that what had been done to them was wrong, and that Emma deserved compensation for being turned into a pawn in someone else's game. "College fund," Marcus said immediately. "Medical school, if she wants it," Zyra agreed. "Or art school. Or trade school. Or travel the world and find herself." Marcus kissed Emma's forehead. "Whatever makes her happy." Emma chose that moment to reach for Sarah, babbling something that sounded remarkably like doctor, but was probably just coincidence. "She remembers you," Zyra said as Sarah took Emma into her arms. "Babies remember more than we give them credit for," Sarah replied, making silly faces that had Emma giggling uncontrollably. "Speaking of which, there's something else I wanted to tell you. We've had 12 other women come forward since Kaylin's conviction. 12 women who are now free to build real families with people who chose them, not people who manipulated them." The reminder of how many lives had been affected by Kaylin's crimes still took Zyra's breath away. But it also filled her with a fierce pride that she'd found the strength to fight back, that her refusal to be silently victimized had freed other women from similar fates. "How are they doing?" she asked. "Better than anyone expected. It turns out that when you remove the source of manipulation and control, people are remarkably resilient. Kind of like you three." As if summoned by the mention of resilience, Emma launched into another stream of babbling, this time directed at the ceiling fan, which she found endlessly fascinating. "What did Dr. Thorne get sentenced to, finally?" Marcus asked. The trial had concluded 6 months ago, but Zyra had deliberately avoided following the news coverage too closely. She'd testified when required, provided evidence when asked, but she'd refused to let Kaylin's legal consequences become the center of her world. 15 years federal, plus another 10 on state charges, Sarah said. He'll be eligible for parole in 12 years, assuming he serves his time quietly. 12 years. Emma would be 13 when Kaylin became eligible for release. Old enough to understand who he was and what he'd done. Old enough to make her own choices about whether she wanted any contact with her biological father. But that was a problem for future Emma, future Zyra, and future Marcus. Present Emma was more concerned with trying to grab Sarah's stethoscope, and present Zyra was focused on making sure their daughter's second Halloween costume fit properly. "Are you staying for dinner?" Zyra asked Sarah. "I'm making Emma's favorite, sweet potato and banana puree." "Ah, fine dining," Sarah laughed. "I'd love to, but I have 3 women in labor tonight. Apparently October 15th is a popular birthday." After Sarah left, the little family settled into their evening routine. Bath time, Emma's favorite, story time, currently featuring a book about a very persistent pigeon, and the gradual winding down that prepared Emma for sleep. As Zaira tucked Emma into her crib, the same crib Marcus had built a year ago, but now in a nursery painted soft green with white clouds drifting across the walls, she marveled at how different this bedtime felt from those terrifying early weeks. "Good night, my beautiful girl," she whispered, stroking Emma's dark hair. "Sweet dreams." Emma looked up at her with those serious eyes. Not Kaylin's eyes, Zaira reminded herself, just Emma's eyes, and made the soft sound she always made when she was content and ready for sleep. Marcus appeared in the doorway, leaning against the frame with the expression of a man who couldn't quite believe how lucky he'd gotten. "She's perfect," he said quietly. "She really is." Zaira turned on the night light, a constellation of stars that rotated slowly across the ceiling, and followed Marcus out of the nursery. In their own bedroom, as they got ready for bed, Zaira caught sight of herself in the mirror and was startled by what she saw. Not the broken woman who had collapsed on her apartment floor a year ago, but someone stronger, more confident, more complete than she'd ever been before. "I was thinking," Marcus said, pulling back the covers, "about what you said earlier. About the birth announcement." "What about it?" "I think we should actually send one. Not to announce Emma's birth. Obviously that ship has sailed. But to announce our family. To tell the world that we chose each other." Zaira considered this, imagining the card they might create. A photo of the three of them, maybe, with words that captured the truth of their journey. "What would it say?" she asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he smiled. "Marcus, Zaira, and Emma Rodriguez Castellanos are pleased to announce the formation of their family through love, choice, and the unshakable belief that biology matters far less than the decision to show up for each other, every single day." "That's perfect," Zaira said, settling into bed beside him. "Except it's too long for a birth announcement." "Fine. How about, love makes a family. Everything else is just details." "Better," she agreed, curling up against his side with the contentment of someone who was exactly where she belonged. Through the baby monitor, they could hear Emma's soft breathing, the sound of a child who was safe and loved and blissfully unaware of how hard the adults in her life had fought to keep her that way. "Marcus," Zaira said quietly. "Yeah. Thank you. For choosing us. For fighting for us. For being the kind of father Emma deserves." "Thank you," he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head, "for being brave enough to let me." Outside their Queen and house, Seattle settled into the comfortable quiet of a Tuesday evening. Inside, a family born of choice rather than chance drifted off to sleep, secure in the knowledge that they had weathered the worst storm imaginable and emerged stronger on the other side. Emma's first birthday party would be small, just Sarah, Marcus's brother and his family, and a few close friends who had supported them through the chaos. There would be too much cake, probably some tears, happy ones, and definitely a lot of photos to commemorate the milestone. But the real celebration had been happening every day for the past year, in every diaper change, every bedtime story, every moment when they chose to be a family despite the circumstances that had brought them together. As Zaira fell asleep, she thought about the birth announcement they'd never sent, the one that told the truth about Emma's beginning. But maybe the truth wasn't in how Emma had been conceived, or who had delivered her, or what legal battles had determined her custody. Maybe the truth was simpler than that. Emma Rodriguez Castellanos had been born into chaos and controversy, but she was being raised by parents who had chosen love over bitterness, hope over fear, and each other over the easier path of walking away. And in the end, that was the only truth that mattered. In the nursery down the hall, Emma slept peacefully under her constellation of stars, dreaming whatever dreams filled the minds of children who were loved unconditionally and completely. She was home. They all were. Sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that choose each other against all odds. After following this incredible journey of love, loss, betrayal, and triumph, what moment touched your heart the most? Share your thoughts on what it really means to be a family. We'd love to hear how this story resonated with you.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you love this story, you will surely enjoy the next one. It's crazier and more intriguing than you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.